কথা ছিল এক তরিতে কেবল তুমি আমি, যাব অকারণে ভেসে কেবল ভেসে। Early in the day it was whispered that we should sail in a boat, only thou and I, and never a soul in the world would know of this our pilgrimage to no country and to no end. In that shoreless ocean, at thy silently listening smile, my song would swell in melodies free as waves, free from all bondage of words. Lo, the evening has come down upon the shore, and in the fading light the seabirds come flying to their nests. Who knows when the chains will be off, and the boat, like the last glimmer of sunset, vanish into the night?
Shantiniketan, November 14, 1913. Rabindranath Tagore, then 52, was passing by the post office accompanied by an English visitor. He received a telegram and decided to read it later. The story goes that the Englishman knew the telegram's contents and urged him to read it. Tagore did, and could hardly believe the news that he had been awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. That night, Tagore sat alone on his terrace, relieved and thankful that the prize money would save his beloved school from the acute financial trouble it was facing. Tagore was born in his ancestral mansion in Jorashako, Kolkata, in 1861, 4 years after India had passed under the British Crown. His father, Rabindranath Tagore, was a pillar of the Brahmo Samaj, a reformist Hindu faith. The Tagores were an unusually gifted family. Rabindranath's brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews had great artistic and literary talent. But he rebelled against formal schooling and was given private lessons at home from tutors. His father introduced him at an early age to the ancient Upanishads, and he inherited a deeply spiritual sensibility.
In one salutation to thee, my God, let all my senses spread out and touch this world at thy feet.
Many of these spiritual thoughts recurred in the titles of his volumes of poetry.
Gurudev Rabindranath Tagore, as we call him in India, is a universalist. His philosophy is based upon humanism and upon, essentially, I feel, upon the philosophy of the Upanishads, in which the whole, not only the whole human race, but the whole universe is included. So there is no exclusivism whatsoever in his philosophy or in his poetry.
He wrote such line that Devotare priyo kori priyere devota, means God is my beloved and my beloved is God. This is a new kind of thought in poetry. His language sounded like almost biblical, but his ideas are very clear and new. And as I said, that this is Vaishnavism in the core, and also there is a touch of Sufism in it.
If you read his philosophic writings, his writings on religion and his aesthetic, poetic philosophy, there seems no doubt that he was a dualist. He keeps stressing this. He distinguishes himself from the non-dualist or monist tradition in India. Relationship is so important. Relationship between man and God, world and spirit. And love, which is absolutely at the heart of his philosophy, can only be there because of that relationship. So he always stresses this. But I think there is also a non-dualist aspect to Tagore, because music, by definition, goes beyond words. It goes beyond relationship. And in song after song, the words are dualistic. There's a relationship in the words, expressed in the words. But the melody, the song itself, goes beyond that.
Many of the early poems were written in Shilaidaho, the family estate now in Bangladesh, in the utmost seclusion of his houseboat on the Podda River. These lyrics expressed a sensitive spirit that had gone through considerable suffering, ever since his beloved sister-in-law and poetic muse Kadumbari Devi committed suicide in 1884. After his return from Shilaidaho, his wife Mrinalini died in 1902. The very next year, his 12-year-old daughter Renuka passed away. In 1905, he lost his father, and in 1907, his youngest son Shomindranath was no more. In 1912, Tagore planned to visit London to gather funds for his school and accompany his son Rothindranath, who wished to complete a doctorate at the University of Illinois. A sudden illness forced him back to Shilaidaho to recuperate. There, as a light-hearted exercise, he began translating some of his poems into English. He was diffident about his English, learned from his tutors and his reading, but enjoyed the activity of translation. He confided to his favorite niece Indira Devi, "That I cannot write English is such a patent fact that I never had even the vanity to feel ashamed of it." If anybody wrote an English note asking me to tea, I did not feel equal to answering it. You may wonder why such crazy ambition should possess one in such a weak state of health. But believe me, I did not undertake the task in a spirit of reckless bravado. I simply felt an urge to recapture, through the medium of another language, the feelings and sentiments which had created such a feast of joy within me in the days gone by. It was sheer therapy for him to sit the whole day in the tiny study perched on the roof of his house in Shilaidaho. His son described the uninterrupted view the poet had from there, vast stretches of sandbars with the silvery water of the majestic Podda. Rabindranath was convinced that the English Gitanjali comprised poems reborn in another garb. They were not mere translations.
There is a simplicity in Tagore's translations, and there's a musicality too. Most of the poems in Gitanjali are actually songs, and although when he travelled abroad I don't think he tried to communicate this particularly, nevertheless in his translations I think he was trying to capture a song-like quality, and his use of this somewhat biblical English prose poetry is, I think, musical.
Well, Gitanjali, of course, is his best known work, mainly because of the excellent translations that were made and for which he got the Nobel Prize. But I think it would be a pity if Tagore is simply judged on the basis of Gitanjali. Gitanjali is a small selection of his poems. He wrote thousands of poems and songs in the course of his lifetime.
Tagore carried the manuscript of translations with him when he eventually sailed for England in May 1912.
Tagore felt that destiny was very important in shaping the course of one's life. And nothing shows this more than the extraordinary circumstances of how the Gitanjali came to win the Nobel Prize. Just imagine, a sick Tagore had to go off to Shilaidaho to recover from an illness. He couldn't go to England at that particular time. His slim copybook got filled with his translations in English, a medium that he never really chose to write in. And this he carries to London and promptly loses this copybook in a London underground, where it's found the very next day in a lost and found office. And then this is received by the poet fraternity of England with great adulation, with great appreciation, and then it goes on to win the Nobel. In a letter to Pearson, Tagore wrote that he felt that he was the poet of the East and he was destined to go to the West at a time when it was poised before the First World War, and that his poetry, his poems had what he felt was a healing touch.
The first person to see the poems was Tagore's artist friend William Rothenstein, who shared it with the distinguished Irish poet W.B. Yeats. Yeats carried the manuscript with him for days, reading it again and again, inspired beyond measure. In the tense pre-war atmosphere of Europe, the moving messages of faith in Tagore's poems were healing. London's intellectuals reacted ecstatically to the Gitanjali poems. Ezra Pound considered them to be the ultimate common sense, which the West had forgotten. The artist Paul Nash read them with tears and joy, as he would the Bible, for strength and comfort. The Reverend C.F. Andrews, who became Tagore's close associate in India, first heard Tagore at private readings in London. The haunting melody of the poems brought back memories of his childhood. The spiritual quality of Gitanjali and Tagore's personal appearance with long hair and beard and in flowing robes typecast him quite easily as a Christ-like, mystic philosopher. Gitanjali was first published privately by India Society in London in 1912. It was dedicated to William Rothenstein with an introduction by W.B. Yeats. Macmillan published it in 1913, which ran into 10 reprints before the poet Thomas Sturge Moore sent it as an entry for the Nobel Prize.
Gitanjali, or song offerings, came at a time when Europe, particularly Western Europe, was seeing one of the greatest of human catastrophes in the making. The war was only 2 years away, the First World War, of course, but the Balkan regions was still already in flames, and Irish Civil War was seething underground. And it was a time when song offerings of Gitanjali gave the Western people some hope. It took the people away from material pursuits to some kind of spirituality, some elemental mysticism, which rescues people from the kind of distress or kind of catastrophe Western Europe was moving towards.
Tagore returned to India in September 1913, 2 months before he received the news of the award. The Nobel citation said that he had been given the prize because of his profoundly sensitive, fresh and beautiful verse, which had become a part of the literature of the West. Tagore was the first non-European to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature. Werner von Heidenstam, a Swedish poet on the Nobel Committee, felt certain that no poet in Europe since Goethe had what he described as Tagore's noble humanity, unaffected greatness, and classical tranquility.
One of the things that defines a really great writer in any language is a unique quality of rhythm. You take any line of Shakespeare, it's Shakespeare, it couldn't be anyone else. Take any line of Milton, it's Milton. Is that I think that same quality of rhythm can be found in all his works.
Many in the West never got to know that most of the Gitanjali poems were in fact songs, and in Bengali.
And these are great art songs. They need to take their place among the great art songs of the world, like the German Lieder tradition, the songs of Schubert and Schumann, or the great French tradition of art songs.
The Western composers were only composing music, melody, arrangements, accompaniment, setting the music into the poetry. But the poetry was composed by someone else, while Tagore himself composed both poetry and music, setting and creating a beautiful, holistic view.
Tagore felt that Western music dwelt in the realm of the day, with its quotidian sounds, the chatter of children, the gossip of women, whereas Indian music, which was raga-based, dwelt in the realm of the night, with its stillness, with its pregnant pauses, what he called the realm of cosmic emotion.
Gitanjali was soon translated into all the major Indian languages. Over time, he was heartened to know that Gitanjali had continued to profoundly move people, from the British war poet Wilfred Owen to French Prime Minister Clemenceau. It was translated into all the major European languages, the Spanish by Juan Jimenez and the French by André Gide particularly acclaimed. It appealed instantly to readers because it was a slender volume and free from mythological allusions, therefore needing no preparation to read it. In 1921, Tagore gave a formal acceptance speech before the Nobel Committee in Stockholm. He recalled the circumstances in which he had written the poems in the seclusion of a houseboat on the Podda.
When I was about 25 years, I used to live in utmost seclusion in the solitude of an obscure Bengal village by the river Ganges in a boathouse. The wild ducks which came during the time of autumn from the Himalayan lakes were my only living companions. And in that solitude, I seemed to have drunk in the open space like wine overflowing with sunshine, and the murmur of the river used to speak to me and tell me the secrets of nature. And I passed my days in the solitude, dreaming and giving shape to my dream in poems. And then came a time when my heart felt a longing to come out of that solitude and to do some work for my human fellow beings. And the one thing, the one work which came to my mind was to teach children. The vigor and the joy of the children, their chats and songs filled the air with a spirit of delight which I drank every day I was there. In this atmosphere and in this environment, I used to write my poems Gitanjali, and I sang them to myself in the midnight under the glorious stars of the Indian sky. And in the early morning and in the afternoon glow of sunset, I used to write these songs till a day came when I felt impelled to come out once again and meet the heart of the large world.
Tagore is so appealing because he was trying to do is to find the truth through simplicity. And I would like to remind you that this is what painters like Picasso were also trying to do in the field of painting, to go beyond the appearance and to find the truth hidden behind that. But the peculiar thing about Tagore is being that he does not deny those appearances. He takes into consideration those appearances. He's not like the old tradition which will deny the world. World is just illusion.
Tagore died in 1941 at the age of 80 in Jurashako, his Kolkata home where he was born. In an incredibly rich creative career, he had written poetry, novels, short stories, dramas, essays, and children's literature, while also composing over 2,000 songs and painting hundreds of watercolors. He inaugurated his university, Vishwabharati, in December 1921 at Shantiniketan. He dreamt of creating here an international center where the whole world could meet in one nest. The curriculum would include all cultures and educate students in an artistic atmosphere. Although he had faced considerable sorrow and grief, he never lost his zest for creativity. He felt that through the creative medium, he was in constant dialogue with the Supreme Creator.
একটি নমস্কারে প্রভু, একটি নমস্কারে সকল দেহ লুটিয়ে পড়ুক তোমার এ সংসারে. In one salutation to thee, my God, let all my senses spread out and touch this world at thy feet. Like a rain cloud of June hung low with its burden of unleashed showers, let all my mind bend down at thy door in one salutation to thee. Let all my songs gather together their diverse strains into a single current and flow to a sea of silence in one salutation to thee. Like a flock of homesick cranes flying night and day back to their mountain nests, let all my life take its voyage to its eternal home in one salutation to thee.